Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, providing more than 41,000 jobs in the production of wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details at choosewood.com.
From the St. Louis Public Radio Newsroom, this is The Gateway. It's Thursday, May 9th. I'm Abby Larico. For years, boosters of St. Louis's technology sector have argued the region needs to double the number of jobs here. A new report now shows there are fewer openings than in years past, prompting some to look to startups as a solution.
There's a lot of wealth in this region. It is not the most adventurous when it comes to investing in early stage startups, and it is a high-risk endeavor, no question about it.
St. Louis Public Radio's Eric Schmid digs into some of the barriers keeping more startups from flourishing in the St. Louis region. That's coming up on The Gateway. Missouri Governor Mike Parson signed a supplemental budget bill yesterday that funds roughly 200 National Guard troops deployment to the U.S.-Mexico border. The Republican governor signed the $2 million bill in Eagle Pass, Texas, a border town about 2 hours west of San Antonio. But Democratic State Representative Peter Meredith of St. Louis says it's a bad move for the state.
This is a campaign stunt for a lot of people about the national fight happening over the border.
The bill backfills the cost of the deployment. The measure passed both chambers in Jefferson City with broad bipartisan support, despite some Democratic objections. The troops are scheduled to remain in Texas until mid-June, but could be extended. Missouri will receive $156 million under the Federal Inflation Reduction Act's Solar for All program. President Joe Biden signed the act into law in August of 2022. Michelle Skaliski has more.
The Missouri funds are earmarked for helping low-income residents benefit from solar, either from their rooftop or from community solar projects, according to Renew Missouri. That's a group that advocates for clean energy for all Missourians. James Owen is the nonprofit's executive director.
I feel like a lot of people see renewable energy and solar as something that people of privilege get to take advantage of. To apply this to customers across the entire spectrum of income, I think could really be impactful on a lot of different levels, mainly on people's pocketbooks.
He says while they wait to see if the funds are appropriated in the state budget, which must be sent to the governor by Friday, Renew Missouri will work to make sure the distribution process is fair and equitable. I'm Michelle Skaliski.
Advocates for people with disabilities are calling on Metro Transit to do a better job providing services mandated by the Americans with Disabilities Act. Se-Yoon Choi is a SLU student who uses Metro services. He says the inconsistency and scheduling requirements imposed on people with disabilities is unacceptable.
As someone who is not able to drive due to my blindness, I think being able to walk a few blocks and board that Metrolink and expect reliability is something that has to happen pretty urgently.
Bi-State Development President and CEO Talby Roach says he is taking the criticism seriously and is planning community listening sessions on the concerns through July. Choi and Roach were both guests on St. Louis on the Air. Housing advocates are calling on city officials to help tenants at a South St. Louis apartment complex find new housing, since the property where they currently live has pests, electrical, and mold issues. As St. Louis Public Radio's Andrea Henderson reports, one tenant says property owners barely fix issues that tenants complain about.
Eric Wayne has been living in the fountains at Carondelet for 11 years. He's witnessed the complex change owners several times. Wayne complained about insulation issues and rodents. He says his complaints went unanswered.
It's been times where whoever was managing here, they weren't even paying to have the trash hauled away. I don't know how to say this, but somebody needs to make this right. I don't know who.
Wayne says he hasn't paid rent since last June because of his apartment's condition. He received an eviction notice on Sunday and doesn't know what to do next. Wayne hopes officials can help with relocation because if they don't, he might have to move in with family. I'm Andrea Henderson, St. Louis Public Radio.
A group of parents, teachers, and students are pleading with the Collinsville School Board to keep Jefferson Elementary School open. The group told district officials at a public hearing this week that the school has been a mainstay in the community. The district announced last month that it was considering closing the school following dwindling enrollment. The Belleville News-Democrat reports if the school does close, the remaining 80 students will be sent to Summit and Twin Echo elementary schools. The district is holding 2 more public hearings to gather input from the community. The final hearing is May 21st. There were about half as many active listings for technology jobs in the St. Louis region in 2023 compared to the previous year. That's according to a report published earlier this year by Tech STL, an organization that advocates for the industry locally. St. Louis Public Radio's Eric Schmid reports this downward trend has some looking to startups as a solution, but it's not a simple fix.
It may seem counterintuitive, but that big drop in tech job listings was a bit of a relief for Emily Hemingway, executive director of Tech STL and the Wedge Innovation Center in Alton.
There was a disconnect between what the data was saying and what we were seeing on the ground.
Hemingway says her organization was getting consistent feedback about how much harder it was to land a job in the tech industry than just a few years ago. She points to a couple of culprits for this slowdown. For one, the tech sector added hundreds of thousands of jobs over the pandemic, and that expansion has leveled out. And she says the growth of artificial intelligence has many companies looking to become leaner.
When you have significantly fewer jobs, you can't be dependent on our large anchor institutions or corporate partners to really drive the workforce.
Hemingway says other regions in the country face this dilemma too. To respond, she argues that St. Louis needs to bolster local startups and entrepreneurs. But that support is inconsistent.
There's a lot of fluff in the startup ecosystem.
Christian Johnson runs a geospatial startup, Metis Analytics, and a weekly event called Founders Lounge. It's a regular forum where entrepreneurs of any experience level can discuss their ideas and any obstacles they've faced.
Welcome everybody to another night at Founders Lounge.
The discussion between a dozen people this week focuses on how to scale a company. One of the attendees shares what they learned through the nationwide rollout of a personal finance website for Spanish speakers.
Once we opened those doors, we got inquiries, leads, questions from California, Texas, where there's strong Hispanic concentrations.
But they weren't familiar with all of the individual state regulations and wound up scaling back where the website was available.
You try to get that traction to demonstrate that you have the clients, you have the inquiries, but you can't open it up all the way.
Johnson says spaces for these kinds of interactions are vital, but they're lacking in St. Louis. Too often, he says he's seen organizations and initiatives for new ventures focus intently on pitching or promoting a hot idea and ignore how to actually grow it.
So it becomes a fashion show, basically, instead of actually it being about people creating great businesses that serve our community, that bring jobs into our community and make our community better.
Financial support is another sticking point, specifically if a startup can find local capital or customers. Gabe Angeri is the executive director of Arch Grants, which awards money to companies with high growth potential that are local or those that will relocate to the region.
St. Louis is an extraordinarily generous city. There's a lot of wealth in this region. It is not the most adventurous when it comes to investing in early stage startups, and it is a high risk endeavor, no question about it.
And Jerry says it matters where a venture gets its support. If their customers or capital are from out of state,
then you start to ask, why am I here?
And Jerry says he would like to see more of the region's corporations dedicate resources to working directly with startups.
Maybe it's 5%, maybe it's 1%, maybe it's 0.5%. It doesn't really matter so much the dollar amount.
He says this kind of commitment, in addition to the support Arch Grants receives, could be the final step to St. Louis having a fully functioning startup ecosystem. Johnson, with Metis Analytics, adds St. Louis has a bit of a blueprint from the biosciences sector that can be replicated elsewhere.
100%, we have to do that, especially when it comes to artificial intelligence.
He says the connection and crossover that's built up over time at Cortex has allowed new companies to secure funding, contracts, and the ability to scale up. I'm Eric Schmid, St. Louis Public Radio.
Turns out St. Louis faced a similar problem in the biosciences sector a few decades ago, but managed to solve it. We have more on that part of this story on STLPR.org. The Gateway is a production of St. Louis Public Radio, a listener-supported service of the University of Missouri-St. Louis. Music by Ryan McNeely of Adult Fur. I'm Abby Larico, and from the St. Louis Public Radio newsroom, this has been The Gateway.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, providing more than 41,000 jobs in the production of wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details at choosewood.com.